The old man's hands were rough as oak bark, weathered by 50 years of ranch work under the Colorado sun. Ethan Thornton sat on the porch of his home, those gnarled fingers turning over a simple gold band. The metal caught the late afternoon light of March 1925, winking like a promise kept. Beside him, his grandson Thomas shifted in the wooden chair. 20 years old, fresh-faced, with his whole life stretching ahead like an unbroken prairie. Tomorrow morning, the boy would board a train heading east, then a ship to France. Military advisor, they called it. Ethan knew better. War had a way of finding young men even when the fighting was supposed to be over. "Grandpa," Thomas said, his voice carrying that particular tone young men use when they're trying to sound brave. "Tell me about the ring, the real story, not the version Mama tells at Christmas." Ethan smiled. His daughter Eleanor, bless her heart, liked to polish the rough edges off their history, made it suitable for children and Sunday dinners. But Thomas was leaving, going to face things Ethan hoped the boy would never have to see. He deserved the truth. The ring belonged to Grace now. Ethan's wife of 50 years, currently napping in their bedroom, her breath coming soft and steady through the open window. Even after all this time, Ethan sometimes woke in the night just to make sure she was still there, still real, still his. "You see this ring, Thomas?" Ethan's voice carried the weight of 79 years, but it was steady, strong. 50 years ago, summer of 1875, I threw it in the dirt right here in this yard. 15 years I'd kept it. 15 years waiting for a woman who wanted me. Not my land, not my horses, not the empire I'd built from ash and blood. Every woman in Colorado had tried. Every single one failed. I was done waiting. He paused, letting the memory wash over him. The heat of that June morning, the dust rising as the ring hit the ground, the absolute certainty that he would die alone. That ring lay there in the summer dust, catching the morning light like a broken promise. I turned my back and walked toward the barn. I didn't know that 3 miles away, a woman with blood on her sleeve was about to change everything. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Ethan recognized the hunger in the boy's eyes, the need for a story that made sense of the world, that showed how broken things could be mended. "You're heading out tomorrow, son. Going to face things I pray you never have to see. But before you go, I want you to know this story, because it's not just about me and your grandmother. It's about why men like us fight, why we build, and why we never ever give up." Ethan closed his eyes and 50 years fell away like autumn leaves. Shut. Summer 1875. Colorado Territory. Ethan Thornton threw his mother's wedding ring into the dirt. The morning sun was already climbing high, turning the ranch yard into a furnace. Dust rose in a small cloud where the ring landed, then settled, leaving the gold band half buried near the fence post. He was 29 years old, but his eyes carried the weight of 50. 15 years since his parents died. 15 years of building, grinding, fighting to turn ashes into something worth having. The Thornton Ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of prime Colorado grazing land. 500 Morgan horses, the finest in the territory for mountain work. 1,200 head of longhorn cattle tough enough to survive the winters that killed softer breeds. An irrigation system that used new California engineering to turn dry land into green pasture. 15 ranch hands year-round, 30 more during cattle drives. Ethan had built all of it, every fence post, every water trough, every carefully negotiated contract. He'd taken the smoking ruins his parents left behind and forged them into an empire, and he was completely, utterly alone. "You're going to regret that." Ethan didn't turn around. He knew his brother's voice like he knew his own heartbeat. "Stay out of it, Danny." Daniel Thornton walked up beside him, 28 years old and still acting like he was 12. He bent down and picked up the ring, brushing off the dust with his thumb. "Ma would tan your hide if she saw you treating her ring like trash." "Ma's dead." "Don't mean she ain't watching." Ethan finally looked at his younger brother. Danny had their mother's easy smile, their father's broad shoulders. He'd inherited the charm that had skipped right over Ethan. The ability to walk into a room and make everyone feel like old friends. Ethan had inherited the silence, the walls, the stubborn refusal to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. "Give it back," Ethan said. Danny closed his fist around the ring. "Nope, I'm holding on to this until you come to your senses." "My senses are fine. Your senses are broken, brother. Have been for 15 years. Danny tucked the ring into his vest pocket. What happened this time? Let me guess. The banker's daughter. Ethan's jaw tightened. Danny sighed. She asked how many acres the ranch covered. First question out of her mouth. Is that it? Maybe she was curious. She was calculating. There's a difference. Ethan turned toward the barn. I've got horses to train. Some of us work for a living. Some of us don't hide from living. Danny called after him. Ethan didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that his brother's words were like summer storms. Loud and flashy, but they passed quick enough if you just waited them out. Inside the barn, the familiar smell of hay and horse sweat wrapped around him like an old blanket. This he understood. Animals didn't lie. They didn't calculate your worth based on your land holdings. They either trusted you or they didn't. And if they didn't, it was because you'd earned their suspicion, not because they wanted something from you. His prize stallion, a black Morgan named Midnight, nickered softly as Ethan approached his stall. At least you're honest about what you want, Ethan murmured, pulling an apple from his pocket. Food and freedom. Simple. The horse took the apple with velvet lips, and Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. This was enough. It had to be enough. The ranch, the horses, the work that kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. He didn't need a wife, didn't need children, didn't need anyone looking at him with expectations he couldn't meet. He'd tried that once. It nearly destroyed him. Mr. Thornton? Ethan turned to find his foreman, standing in the barn door, hat in hand. William Carter had worked the ranch for 8 years, ever since Ethan had found him half dead from fever on the road to Denver. He was the closest thing Ethan had to a friend, which meant they rarely spoke about anything other than horses and weather. What is it, Will? There's been an accident on the North Road. Stagecoach overturned at Miller's Crossing. Sheriff's asking for men to help clear the road. Thought you'd want to know since you're heading to town for supplies anyway. Ethan frowned. Town meant people. People meant questions about why he wasn't married yet, when he was going to settle down, whether he'd heard about the new school teacher from St. Louis, who was just lovely and would make someone a wonderful wife. But duty was duty. A man didn't turn his back on folks in need, even if those folks would spend the next month gossiping about him. Saddle up my horse. I'll head out now. The ride to Miller's Crossing took half an hour at a steady pace. Ethan could have pushed faster, but there was no point exhausting his horse for what was probably nothing more than a broken axle and some scattered luggage. The summer heat pressed down on him like a wool blanket. He tugged his hat lower to shade his eyes from the midday glare. He heard the commotion before he saw it. Men shouting, horses neighing, the creak and groan of wood being moved. When he crested the hill overlooking the crossing, he pulled his horse to a stop. The stagecoach lay on its side like a wounded animal, one wheel still spinning lazily in the air. 3 men were working to right it, while the driver sat on a rock holding a bloody cloth to his head. A woman in a blue dress stood apart from the group, arguing with Deputy Wilson. I told you I don't need a doctor, she was saying as Ethan rode closer. Her voice was steady, but Ethan caught the slight tremor beneath the words. I need my trunk. There are medical supplies inside. Ma'am, you're bleeding, the deputy interrupted. You need to sit down. And I'm a doctor's daughter. I know when I'm bleeding, and I know this is nothing more than a scratch. Her voice sharpened. What I also know is that the driver has a possible concussion, and that man over there, she pointed to one of the workers, is favoring his left leg in a way that suggests a sprained ankle at minimum. So instead of arguing with me about whether I need to sit down, perhaps you could help me retrieve my supplies so I can actually be useful. Deputy Wilson's face reddened. Now see here, miss. It's Mrs. actually. No. She stopped, pressed her lips together. Never mind what it is. The point remains. Ethan dismounted without consciously deciding to do so. Something about the woman had caught his attention, though he couldn't say what. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in sweaty tangles around a face that was too angular to be pretty. A nose that was slightly too long, a mouth that was slightly too wide. But there was something in the way she held herself. Spine straight, chin lifted. It made it impossible to look away. She was terrified. Ethan could see it now that he was closer. The slight shake in her hands, the way her eyes kept darting to the road behind her. The tension in her shoulders that had nothing to do with the accident. She was terrified, and she was hiding it behind a wall of competence and sharp words. Ethan understood walls. He'd built enough of his own. The lady asked for her trunk, he heard himself say. Where is it? Deputy Wilson turned relief and irritation warring on his face. Mr. Thornton, didn't see you ride up. We haven't had time to sort through the luggage yet. The coach needs to be... I'll find it myself. Ethan turned to the woman. What's it look like? She blinked at him momentarily, thrown off balance by his directness. Up close, her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, and there was a bruise forming on her left cheekbone that made something in Ethan's chest tighten with an emotion he refused to name. Brown leather, she said after a moment. Brass fittings. My father's initials on the lid. H.W. Ethan nodded and walked toward the overturned coach without another word. The other men had managed to right it, partially creating enough space to access the luggage compartment. He found the trunk she'd described wedged behind a hat box and a carpet bag. He hauled it out with more care than he usually afforded anyone's belongings. When he carried it back to her, she was already kneeling beside the driver, examining his head wound with gentle, competent fingers. It's not as bad as it looks, she was telling him. Head wounds bleed heavily. You'll have a headache for a few days, but you'll live. She looked up as Ethan set the trunk beside her. Thank you. You're welcome. She opened the trunk and Ethan caught a glimpse of neatly organized medical supplies. Bandages, bottles of various liquids, instruments he didn't recognize. Everything labeled with careful handwriting. She worked quickly cleaning the driver's wound and wrapping it with practiced efficiency. You really are a doctor's daughter, Ethan said. Was. She didn't look up from her work. He died 6 months ago. I'm sorry. So am I. She moved to the man with the injured ankle next, and Ethan found himself following her. He told himself it was because he wanted to make sure she didn't collapse. That cut on her arm was still bleeding, soaking through her sleeve in a way that concerned him. But the truth was something more uncomfortable. He couldn't stop watching her. The way she spoke to the injured man. Firm but kind. The way her hands moved with sure confidence despite the tremor he'd noticed earlier. The way she didn't ask for help, didn't expect it, just did what needed to be done. When she finally finished, she sat back on her heels and pressed a hand to her forehead. The movement made her wince, and for the first time, Ethan saw the exhaustion beneath the competence. Your turn, he said. She looked up at him. Excuse me. Your arm, let me see it. It's fine. It's still bleeding. I'm aware. Then you're aware you need to let someone look at it. I can look at it myself. With what your other arm's too short to reach. She stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw something flicker in those honey-colored eyes. Suspicion, maybe. Or calculation. The same look he'd seen in 100 women who saw him as a means to an end. But no, that wasn't quite right. This was different. This was the look of someone who'd been burned and wasn't eager to touch fire again. He understood that look too. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. I'm not going to expect anything in return. I'm just offering to help because you need it and I'm here. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. You don't even know my name. Don't need to know your name to see you're bleeding. Another long pause. Then slowly she extended her arm. The cut was deeper than he'd expected, running along her forearm in a jagged line that would definitely scar. He cleaned it with water from his canteen and bandaged it with supplies from her own trunk, working as gently as he knew how. Grace, she said quietly. He looked up. What? My name. Grace Whitmore. Most people call me Grace. Ethan Thornton. I know who you are. He frowned. How? The deputy called you Mr. Thornton, and you don't look like anyone's deputy. That means you're someone important enough to be recognized by title alone. She gestured vaguely at his clothes, his horse, the quality of his boots. Wealthy but not soft, rancher probably. The largest spread around here belongs to a man named Thornton. So either you're him or you're his brother. Ethan felt an unexpected smile tug at the corner of his mouth. You always this observant. My father taught me to pay attention. He said observation was half of diagnosis. Smart man. The smartest I ever knew. Ethan finished tying off the bandage and released her arm. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The moment stretched. Ethan was aware of the sun beating down, the murmur of voices from the other men, the creak of the coach settling on its wheels. But mostly he was aware of Grace Whitmore kneeling in the dust with her arm freshly bandaged, looking at him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Where are you headed?" Ethan asked, more to break the silence than anything else. "Silver Ridge. I was hoping to find work." "What kind of work?" "Any kind." She stood brushing dust from her skirt with her uninjured hand. "I can cook, clean, keep books. I have medical training, though no official credentials. I'm not afraid of hard labor." "What you are is desperate." She flinched as if he'd slapped her. Ethan cursed himself silently. That had come out wrong, harsher than he'd meant. "I prefer determined," she said, her voice cold now. "Desperate people make dangerous decisions, and judgmental people make poor first impressions." Ethan blinked. He couldn't remember the last time someone had snapped back at him like that. Most people either tiptoed around him because of his wealth or avoided him entirely because of his reputation for coldness. This woman did neither. She stood before him battered and bleeding and alone, and she met his eyes without flinching. "You're right," he said. "That was out of line. I apologize." Now it was her turn to blink. "You apologize. I'm capable of admitting when I'm wrong. That's rare in a man." "So I've been told." Deputy Wilson approached, interrupting whatever might have come next. "Miss Whitmore, the stage will be delayed at least until tomorrow. We need to get the wheel repaired. There's a boarding house in town where you can stay." "I don't have money for a boarding house." Ethan spoke before he could stop himself. "I'll cover it." Grace's eyes snapped to his face. "No. It's not charity. Consider it payment for services rendered. You helped my men today." "They're not your men." "One of them is. Will Carter with the ankle. He works my ranch. You patched him up. That's worth a night's lodging." "I don't accept payment for medical care." "Then accept it as a loan. Pay me back when you find work." She studied him with those sharp, honey eyes, and Ethan knew she was trying to find the angle. The catch. The hidden expectation that would reveal his true motives. She wouldn't find one because there wasn't one. He didn't know why he was helping her. He didn't help people. He kept to himself, minded his own business, and avoided entanglements of any kind. But something about Grace Whitmore had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't explain and didn't particularly want to examine. "Fine," she said finally. "A loan. I'll pay you back with interest." "No interest." "Interest or nothing." "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Good, then we understand each other." She turned and walked toward the salvaged luggage, leaving Ethan standing there feeling like a fool. Danny would laugh himself sick if he could see this. The great Ethan Thornton brought up short by a woman with a bleeding arm and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. He should walk away. Get on his horse ride into town, buy his supplies, and forget he ever met her. In a week, she'd find work or move on or do whatever desperate women did, and he'd never see her again. That would be the smart thing to do. That would be the safe thing. Ethan watched Grace Whitmore struggle to lift her trunk with one good arm. Watched her refuse help from two men who offered. Watched her finally accept assistance only when it became clear she couldn't manage alone. And he knew with a certainty that settled into his bones like winter cold that walking away wasn't an option anymore. The boarding house in Silver Ridge was run by a widow named Ruth Bennett. She was 58 years old, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for asking no questions as long as you paid your bill and didn't cause trouble. Ethan led Grace there himself, ignoring the curious looks from townspeople who had never seen him escort a woman anywhere. 2 weeks, he told Ruth, pressing money into her hand. Room and board, and don't let her pay you back. She'll try. Ruth's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Ethan Thornton playing benefactor. Never thought I'd see the day. Don't make more of it than it is. Wouldn't dream of it. Grace had already disappeared upstairs with her trunk refusing help, carrying it despite the obvious strain on her injured arm. Ethan stood in Ruth's parlor feeling foolish and exposed and entirely uncertain why he'd come this far instead of just giving directions and riding away. She's running from something, Ruth said quietly. Ethan looked at her. How do you know? Been running a boarding house for 20 years. You learn to recognize the signs. She lowered her voice. Saw a man asking about a woman matching her description in Hallbrook last week. Well-dressed Eastern accent. Not the kind of man who takes no for an answer. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. Something dark and fierce began to simmer in his chest. If anyone comes asking about her, Ruth said, her voice firm, I don't know nothing about nobody who stays under my roof. That's my policy, And I ain't about to change it for some fancy man from back east. Ethan nodded slowly. He should leave now. Go back to his ranch, his horses, his carefully constructed solitude. Whatever trouble Grace Whitmore was running from, it wasn't his problem. But he thought about the fear in her eyes, the way she'd flinched when he called her desperate, the tremor in her hands that she'd hidden so well. If she needs work, he heard himself say, send her to the ranch. I've got horses that could use someone with medical training. Ruth's smile widened. Ethan Thornton, you old fool. Don't start. Wouldn't dream of it. But your mama's looking down right now, and I'll bet you anything she's laughing. Ethan left without responding because there was nothing to say. His mother probably was laughing. She'd always said his stubbornness would be his downfall. He just hadn't expected it to feel quite so much like salvation. 3 days later, Grace Whitmore arrived at the Thornton Ranch. She came in a borrowed wagon, her single trunk in the back, and a letter from Ruth Bennett in her hand. The letter said she was a hard worker who didn't complain and didn't pry. Coming from Ruth, that was about the highest recommendation anyone could get. Ethan met her in the yard, telling himself the flutter in his chest was just surprise. Mrs. Bennett said you might have work, Grace said without preamble. Might? Is that a yes or a no? Oh yeah, it's a might, depends. On what? On whether you can actually do what you claim. Anyone can say they have medical training. Proving it's another matter. Her chin lifted. Show me a sick animal and I'll prove it. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. This way. He led her to the barn, to a stall in the back where his second-best mare lay on fresh straw, breathing shallowly. The local veterinarian had come out twice and declared there was nothing to be done. The horse would either recover on her own or she wouldn't. Ethan had been sleeping in the barn for 3 nights, unwilling to let her die alone. Grace knelt beside the mare without hesitation, running her hands along the animal's sides, checking her eyes, her mouth, her hooves. Her movements were sure and competent, just as they'd been at the accident site. When did she stop eating, she asked. 4 days ago. And the veterinarian said what exactly? That it was some kind of infection, that there was nothing he could do. Grace made a sound that might have been contempt. Did he check her teeth? Her teeth. Horses can develop abscesses in their teeth just like humans. If untreated, the infection can spread and cause... She trailed off her fingers, probing the mare's jaw. The horse flinched. There, feel that swelling. Ethan crouched beside her, and she guided his hand to a spot beneath the mare's jaw that was hot and hard to the touch. He felt like a fool for missing it. Can you fix it? He asked. I can try. I'll need to lance the abscess and drain it. It'll be messy and the horse won't like it. But if I'm right, she should start improving within a day or 2. And if you're wrong, she met his eyes, then she's no worse off than she was before. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. There it was again. That directness, that refusal to make promises she couldn't keep. Every other person who had offered to help with the mare had guaranteed results. Grace Whitmore guaranteed only effort. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. Do it, he said. The next hour was exactly as messy as she'd promised. The mare screamed and thrashed, and it took 3 men to hold her still while Grace worked. Blood and worse things flowed from the incision. But Grace never flinched, never hesitated, never stopped talking, in that low, steady voice that seemed to calm both the animal and the men holding her. When it was over, she sat back on her heels, covered in things Ethan didn't want to think about, and let out a long breath. Now we wait, she said. How long? 2 hours. If she starts eating again, we're on the right track. Ethan nodded slowly. He looked at this woman, exhausted, filthy, kneeling in a barn next to a horse that might still die, and he felt something crack open in his chest. You're hired, he said. Grace looked up at him. Just like that. Just like that, room and board, fair wages, and complete respectability. You'll have your own quarters. My brother and the ranch hands will treat you with respect, or they'll answer to me. And if the mare dies, then I tried. That's more than anyone else did. She was quiet for a long moment, then slowly she stood. There's something you should know before I accept. Ethan felt a familiar tension creep back into his shoulders. Here it came. The catch, the revelation, the reason she was too good to be true. I'm being followed, she said quietly, by a man who believes he owns me. He's dangerous and he's wealthy and he will eventually find me here. If you take me in, you're taking on that trouble too. Ethan waited for the fear to come, the instinct for self-preservation that should tell him to walk away to protect himself, to maintain the careful distance that had kept him safe for 15 years. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something else entirely, something that felt dangerously like purpose. "What's his name?" he asked. "Victor Ashworth." "And what does he want?" Grace's honey eyes hardened. "He wants a wife who will give him access to her father's medical research and her family's connections. He wants a woman who will smile and nod and never question him. He wants ownership." She paused. "He doesn't want me. He wants what I represent." Ethan understood that. God help him, he understood it perfectly. "Welcome to the Thornton Ranch, Miss Whitmore," he said. "Let him come." The words hung in the summer air between them, heavy with promise and danger, and something neither of them was ready to name. 24 hours later, the mare ate her first meal in almost a week, and Ethan Thornton, who had spent 15 years building walls around his heart, felt the first stone begin to crumble. The first week passed like water through fingers. Grace worked from dawn until her hands ached, and then she worked some more. She tended the horse with a devotion that surprised even herself, learning their names and their temperaments, the particular way each one liked to be touched. Midnight, Ethan's prize stallion, had taken to her, immediately pressing his velvet nose against her palm whenever she passed his stall. The mare she'd saved, Bella as the hands called her, followed Grace around the barn like a lovesick puppy. "Never seen anything like it," Will Carter said one morning, watching Bella trail Grace to the water trough. "That horse wouldn't let anyone near her for 2 years after Mr. Thornton bought her. Now look at her." Grace smiled and said nothing. She understood Bella in a way she couldn't explain. They were both creatures who had learned to fear human hands, and they were both slowly, painfully learning to trust again. Ethan watched her. She felt his eyes on her constantly, though he rarely spoke more than necessary. He would appear in the barn doorway while she worked, arms crossed, face unreadable. He would pass her at meals and nod just once before retreating to his study. He would ride out at dawn and return at dusk, always alone, always silent. She didn't know what to make of him. The other men on the ranch were easy enough to understand. Will was kind and quiet, still grateful for the way she tended his ankle. The younger hands were curious but respectful, keeping their distance, as Ethan had clearly instructed. But Ethan Thornton was a locked door, and Grace couldn't find the key. "He wasn't always like this," Danny told her one afternoon. Grace looked up from the bridle she was mending. Ethan's younger brother had made a habit of appearing whenever Ethan wasn't around, full of easy smiles and easier conversation. She didn't entirely trust him, but she didn't distrust him either. He was too open to be dangerous. "Like what?" she asked. "Closed off. Cold." Danny leaned against the fence, squinting into the summer sun. "When we were kids, Ethan was the one who laughed loudest, the one who made friends with everyone. Ma used to say he had enough love in his heart for the whole territory." "What changed?" Danny's smile faded. "Our parents died. And then—" He stopped, shook his head. "It ain't my story to tell. But there was a woman about 5 years after. Ethan thought she was different, thought she saw him for who he really was." Grace's hands stilled on the leather. "What happened?" "She was engaged to a man back east the whole time. Rich fellow. She was just playing with Ethan, seeing if she could make the stone-hearted bachelor fall for her." Danny's voice hardened. "When he found out something in him just died, he hasn't let anyone close since." Grace absorbed this information in silence. She thought about the way Ethan had looked at her that first day, measuring her for hidden motives. She thought about the careful distance he maintained, never touching her, rarely speaking to her, but always watching. He was waiting for her to reveal herself as a fraud, just like the woman before her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Danny grinned, and for a moment he looked exactly like the charming rogue the townspeople probably thought he was. "Because I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching, and I've seen the way you look at him." He pushed off the fence. "Someone's got to break through those walls of his. Might as well be someone who understands what it's like to build them." He walked away before she could respond. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room off the kitchen, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered softly. The wind rustled through the grass. A coyote howled in the distance. She thought about Victor. She thought about the last time she'd seen him standing in her father's study with that cold smile on his face. Her father had been dead for 3 days. The funeral was the next morning, and Victor had come to inform her that the wedding would proceed as planned, that her father's debts would be forgiven as part of the arrangement, that she should be grateful for his generosity. She remembered the way his hand had closed around her wrist when she tried to refuse. The bruises had taken 2 weeks to fade. She'd run that same night, packed one trunk and with everything she could carry, and slipped out the back door while Victor dined with her father's colleagues, already dividing up the estate like vultures picking at a carcass. 3 months of running, 3 months of looking over her shoulder, 3 months of waiting for him to find her. And now she was here in a stranger's house, falling for a man who didn't trust her and probably never would. She was a fool. A soft knock at her door made her bolt upright, heart hammering. "Miss Whitmore," Ethan's voice low and rough. "You awake?" She pulled on her robe and opened the door a crack. "What is it?" "Midnight's acting strange, won't let anyone near him. Thought you might." He trailed off, and even in the dim lamplight, she could see the discomfort on his face. Asking for help didn't come naturally to him. "I'll come." The barn was dark except for a single lantern hanging near Midnight's stall. The stallion was pacing, tossing his head, making sounds of distress that sent the other horses shifting nervously in their own enclosures. "Started about an hour ago," Ethan said. "I've tried everything. He usually calms down for me, but tonight—" He shook his head. Grace approached the stall slowly, keeping her voice soft. "Easy, boy. Easy. What's got you so worked up?" Midnight's ears swiveled toward her. He stopped pacing, nostrils flaring. "That's it," she murmured. "That's it. Nothing to be afraid of." She opened the stall door and slipped inside. Ethan made a sound of protest, but she ignored him. Midnight stood trembling as she approached, his dark eyes rolling with fear. And then she saw it. "There's a snake," she said quietly, "in the corner. Don't move." Ethan went rigid. "What kind? I can't tell in this light, but Midnight knows it's there. That's why he's panicking." "I'll get a shovel." "No, any sudden movement and it might strike." Grace kept her eyes on the coiled shape in the corner, barely visible in the shadows. "I need you to open the back door of the stall slowly. Give Midnight an escape route. And what are you going to do? Keep it focused on me." "Like hell you are." "Ethan." She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "Trust me." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them acknowledged. Ethan moved to the back of the stall. The door creaked as he eased it open. Midnight's ears pricked toward the sound. "Go on, boy," Grace whispered. "Go on. Get out of here." The stallion hesitated for one agonizing moment. Then he bolted through the open door and into the paddock beyond. The snake moved. Grace threw herself backward, hitting the stall wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. The snake struck at empty air where she'd been standing, and before it could coil for another attack, Ethan was there with a pitchfork pinning it to the ground. "Rattler," he said grimly. "Big one." Grace slid down the wall until she was sitting in the hay, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Ethan killed the snake with a single efficient motion, then dropped the pitchfork and crossed to where she sat. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Grace." His hand closed around her arm, gentle but firm. "Look at me." She looked up. His face was closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the fear that still lingered in his gray eyes. Fear for her. "I'm fine," she managed. "Just give me a minute. Take all the time you need." He didn't let go of her arm. She didn't ask him to. They sat there in the hay, breathing together until the shaking stopped and the world settled back into something resembling normal. "Thank you," Ethan said finally, "for what, almost getting myself killed. For saving my horse again." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're making a habit of it." "Someone has to." He helped her to her feet, and for a moment they stood face to face in the dim lantern light. Grace became acutely aware of how little she was wearing. Just her nightgown and robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She should feel vulnerable, exposed. Instead, she felt safe. "You should get some sleep," Ethan said, his voice rougher than before. "So should you." "I will. I just need to check on Midnight first. Make sure he's settled." She nodded and turned to go. She was halfway to the barn door when his voice stopped her. "Grace," she looked back. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "In the stall. When you asked me to open the door, you trusted me to do it right. You did. I know, but you didn't know I would. You trusted me anyway. He paused. I'm not used to that. Neither am I, she thought. But she didn't say it. She just nodded and walked back to the house, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. The next morning, everything changed. Grace was hanging laundry when Danny rode up at a gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. "Where's Ethan?" he demanded, barely waiting for the animal to stop before he was out of the saddle. "In the north pasture." "Why, what's wrong?" Danny's face was grim. "There's a man in town, Eastern fellow, expensive suit, asking questions about a woman who arrived on the stagecoach 3 weeks ago." The world tilted sideways. "He found me," Grace whispered. "Not yet. Ruth sent him off with some story about a woman matching your description heading to Denver. But he's not stupid. He'll figure out the truth soon enough." Danny grabbed her shoulders. "Grace, who is this man? What does he want?" She couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up, her chest tight with a fear she'd been running from for 3 months. "His name is Victor Ashworth," she heard herself say. "He's the man I was supposed to marry, the man I ran from." "Why did you run?" The question unlocked something inside her. The words came pouring out, the engagement arranged by her father before his death. Victor's true nature revealed only after the documents were signed. The bruises hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars. The night she'd fled with nothing but a trunk full of medical supplies and her father's research notes. "He doesn't want me," she finished, her voice hollow. "He wants my father's research. My father was working on something. A new treatment, a new technique. Victor invested heavily in it. Without me, without the notes, he loses everything." Danny's grip on her shoulders tightened. "Does Ethan know?" "He knows someone is following me. He doesn't know the details." "He needs to know." "I can't." "Grace," Danny's voice was firm, "my brother has spent 15 years building walls around himself because he doesn't trust anyone. You're the first person he's let anywhere close since—" He stopped, shook his head. "If you don't tell him the truth, all of it, he's going to find out some other way. And then those walls will go back up so fast you'll never get through them again." She knew he was right. She'd known it from the beginning. But the thought of seeing Ethan's face when he learned the full extent of her troubles, the danger she'd brought to his doorstep. "I'll leave," she said, "tonight, before Victor can trace me here." "Is that really what you want?" No, God, no. She wanted to stay. She wanted this ranch, this life, this chance at something real. She wanted him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "I'll tell him," she said. "Tonight." Danny's smile was sad and knowing. "He won't ask you to leave. You'll see." "How do you know?" "Because I haven't seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you in 15 years. And if there's one thing Ethan Thornton doesn't do, it's give up on something he wants." That evening, Grace waited on the porch. She heard Ethan's horse before she saw him, the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. He appeared out of the gathering dusk, tired and dust-covered, and more handsome than any man had a right to be. "Grace," he dismounted, frowning, "what are you doing out here?" "Waiting for you. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Ethan's expression went carefully blank. She recognized that look. It was the same one he'd worn the day they met when he was measuring her for hidden motives. "Go on," he said. So she told him everything. The engagement, the abuse, the research, the money, Victor's connections to powerful men in Washington, the lawyers who would back his claim if he ever found her, the certainty that he would never stop looking, not because he loved her, but because she represented an investment he refused to lose. Ethan listened without interrupting. His face revealed nothing, but she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. She saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. When she finished, the silence stretched between them like a living thing. "Say something," she whispered. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know, that you're angry, that you want me to leave, that you wish you'd never—" "I'm not angry at you." She blinked. "You're not." "I'm angry at him." Ethan's voice was low and dangerous, nothing like the careful neutrality he usually maintained. "I'm angry at a man who would put his hands on a woman, who would treat her like property, who would chase her across a country because she had the courage to refuse him." He stepped closer. "I'm angry that you felt you couldn't tell me this from the start, that you thought I would blame you for running from a man who hurt you. I thought you would send me away." Why? Because that's what everyone does. The words came out broken, sharp-edged with years of disappointment. My father's colleagues, my friends, everyone who knew what Victor was, what he did, they all looked the other way because he was wealthy and connected and I was just a woman with no power and no protection. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could see the storm in his gray eyes, the barely contained fury that wasn't directed at her. Do I look like the kind of man who looks the other way? No. Then stop expecting me to. His hand came up, and for one heart-stopping moment, Grace thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, it stopped just short, hovering in the air between them like a question. I spent 15 years believing that everyone who got close to me wanted something, he said quietly. My land, my money, my horses. I convinced myself it was safer to be alone than to risk being used again. He paused. You're the first person who's ever looked at me like I'm just a man, not a prize to be won or a conquest to be claimed. Just me. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is? Grace's breath caught in her throat. Yes, I know exactly how terrifying it is. Good. Then you understand why I'm not going to let you run. Why? Because this isn't about owing. This is about... He stopped frustrated, searching for words that didn't come easily. This is about the fact that I haven't slept through the night in 15 years. And last night after you saved midnight, I slept like a dead man. This is about the fact that I catch myself looking for you every time I walk into a room. This is about the fact that you make me want things I stopped letting myself want a long time ago. Grace couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at this impossible man who was offering her something she'd never dared to hope for. I'm not asking for anything, Ethan said. I'm not expecting anything. I just need you to know that whatever comes next, you're not facing it alone. Not anymore. She should say something, something profound, something meaningful, something that matched the weight of what he'd just given her. Instead, she closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, barely more than a brush of mouth against mouth, but it sent a shock through her entire body, a jolt of electricity that made her gasp. Ethan went absolutely still. She pulled back, suddenly terrified that she'd made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle as a whisper. Don't you dare apologize. And then he was kissing her, really kissing her, and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them and the summer night and the impossible, terrifying, wonderful feeling of finally being seen. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan pressed his forehead against hers. Whatever happens next, he said, we face it together. Together, she agreed. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and 3 miles away in a hotel room in Silver Ridge, Victor Ashworth stared at a map of the surrounding ranches and smiled. He'd always enjoyed the hunt, and his prey was very, very close. The kiss changed everything and nothing. Ethan still rose before dawn. He still worked the ranch with the same relentless focus. He still spoke in short sentences and avoided unnecessary words. But now when their eyes met across the breakfast table, something passed between them that made Grace's heart stutter. Now when he passed her in the barn, his hand would brush against hers just for a second, barely noticeable, and the touch would linger on her skin for hours. They didn't speak about what had happened on the porch. They didn't need to. Some things existed beyond words. But the knowledge of Victor's presence in town hung over them like a storm cloud, darkening even the brightest moments. He's still at the hotel, Danny reported 3 days after the kiss, bursting into the kitchen where Grace and Ethan were having breakfast. Asking questions, showing people a photograph. Grace's blood ran cold. A photograph? Your engagement portrait, from what I hear. The one that ran in the Boston papers. She remembered that portrait. Victor had insisted on it, wanted the whole world to see his prize. She'd smiled for the camera while his hand gripped her arm hard enough to leave bruises hidden beneath the long sleeves of her dress. Has anyone told him where I am? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Not yet. Ruth's been spreading stories about you heading to California. Most folks don't want to get involved with Eastern money and Eastern problems. Danny paused, his usual grin fading. But someone will talk eventually. They always do. Ethan had been silent throughout this exchange, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. Finally, he spoke. Then we need to be ready. Ready for what? Grace asked. For whatever he tries next. That afternoon, Ethan did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He invited Grace into his study. The room was smaller than she'd expected, lined with books and cluttered with papers. A large desk dominated one wall, and above it hung a portrait of a couple she immediately recognized as Ethan's parents. They had the same gray eyes, the same strong jaw. My father built this ranch from nothing, Ethan said, following her gaze. He came west with $10 and a dream. By the time I was born, he owned more land than any man in the territory. He must have been remarkable. He was. Ethan moved to the desk and pulled open a drawer. He also kept meticulous records. Every transaction, every contract, every legal document. He taught me that a man's word might be his bond, but paper is what holds up in court. He withdrew a thick leather folder and set it on the desk. What is this? Grace asked. Insurance. Ethan opened the folder to reveal a stack of documents. Land deeds, cattle contracts, bank statements. Everything that proves my ownership of this ranch is legal and uncontested. He looked up at her. Victor Ashworth is a businessman. He understands leverage. Right now, he thinks you're alone and unprotected. A woman with no resources and no allies. I am alone and unprotected. Not anymore. Ethan pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I want to hire you officially as the ranch's veterinary specialist. A formal contract witnessed and filed with the county clerk. Grace frowned. Why, because a contract makes you an employee with legal standing. It means Victor can't simply claim you and drag you away. Any dispute would have to go through the courts, and courts take time. Time for us to find another way. Another way to what? Ethan's eyes met hers, and she saw the steel beneath the quiet exterior. To stop him, permanently. She stared at him. This man who had spent 15 years avoiding entanglements of any kind, now weaving himself into her troubles with methodical precision. You've thought about this, she said. I've done nothing but think about this since Danny told me he was in town. Why? The question hung between them. Ethan set down his pen and walked around the desk until he stood directly in front of her. Because 3 weeks ago I threw my mother's ring in the dirt, he said quietly. I'd given up on love, on connection, on the possibility that anyone could want me for who I am rather than what I own. And then you walked into my life with blood on your sleeve and fire in your eyes, and you made me want things I'd stopped believing in. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender it made her throat tight. I'm not good at this, he continued, at saying what I feel. I've spent too long building walls to know how to tear them down gracefully. But I know that I'm not willing to lose you. Not to Victor Ashworth, not to fear, not to anything. So if you'll let me, I'm going to fight for you. Even if it costs you everything. What will I lose? His voice was steady. The ranch, I built it once. I can build it again. My reputation, I never cared much for what people thought anyway. You want to know what I'd really lose if Victor takes you? She couldn't speak. Could only shake her head. Everything that matters, Ethan said simply. The only thing that's made me feel alive in 15 years. Grace felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Okay, she whispered. Okay, what? Okay, I'll sign your contract. Okay, I'll stay. Okay, I'll let you fight for me. She took a shaky breath. But I'm fighting too. I'm not going to hide behind you and wait for someone else to save me. Ethan smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his whole face. I wouldn't expect anything less. He kissed her, then slow and deep, and for a few precious moments, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The contract was signed that evening with Danny and Will Carter as witnesses. Official and legal, Danny declared, blotting the ink. Miss Grace Whitmore, veterinary specialist employed by the Thornton Ranch. Salary, room and board. It feels strange, Grace admitted. Signing a paper to prove I belong somewhere. Paper doesn't prove anything, Ethan said. It just makes it harder for people to pretend otherwise. The next morning, Victor Ashworth came to the ranch. Grace was in the barn when she heard the hoofbeats. 2 horses moving fast. She set down the brush she'd been using on Bella's coat and moved to the door, her heart already pounding. Ethan was crossing the yard from the main house, Danny falling into step beside him. Their postures were casual, but Grace had learned to read them well enough to see the tension in their shoulders, the readiness in their stride. Victor dismounted with the easy grace of a man accustomed to fine horses and finer things. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, silver-haired, handsome, in a cold-polished way. His companion was a younger man in a deputy's uniform, looking uncomfortable and out of his depth. "Mr. Thornton, I presume?" Victor's voice carried across the yard smooth as silk. "I'm Victor Ashworth. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "This is private property," Ethan replied, his voice flat. "State your business or leave." "My business is simple. I'm looking for my fiancée, a woman named Grace Whitmore. I have reason to believe she's been working here under false pretenses." Grace's nails dug into her palms. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to be anywhere but here. But Ethan's words echoed in her mind. Fear only works if you let it. She forced herself to step out of the barn and into the sunlight. "Hello, Victor." His eyes found her immediately, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or satisfaction. The look of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Grace, thank God." He started toward her, his voice dripping with false concern. "I've been worried sick. When you disappeared, He shook his head as if overcome with emotion. "I understood. I forgave you. Your father's death, the stress of the arrangements. It was too much, but it's time to come home now. We have a wedding to plan." "I didn't disappear," Grace said, her voice carrying across the yard. "I left. You were distraught." Victor was still moving toward her, closing the distance with each step. "Grief does terrible things to the mind. But I'm here now. Everything will be all right." Ethan stepped into his path. The movement was deliberate, controlled. No aggression, no threat. Just a man placing himself between a woman and danger. "The lady said she left," Ethan said quietly. "Seems to me that means she doesn't want to be found." Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went hard. "This is a private matter between me and my fiancée." "She's not your fiancée, she's my employee." Victor laughed. The sound was cold, calculated to make Grace feel small. "Employee, is that what she told you?" He turned his attention back to Grace. "Did you also tell him about the engagement contract your father signed? The dowry I paid, the legal obligations you're running from?" "I told him everything," Grace said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Including the parts you conveniently leave out." "And what parts would those be?" "The bruises, the threats, the way you made sure I had nowhere to turn when my father died." Victor's mask slipped for just a second, long enough for Grace to see the rage beneath, long enough for Ethan and Danny to see it too. "Grace, you are clearly confused," Victor said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The grief has affected your mind. Deputy Wilson here can attest that I've come to bring you home for medical treatment." "I'm a doctor's daughter," Grace said. "I don't need medical treatment." "You need help. Professional help." Victor turned to the deputy. "You see how she is paranoid, delusional, making wild accusations against the man who loves her." Deputy Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Ashworth, maybe we should take her into protective custody," Victor said smoothly. "For her own good." "No," Ethan's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This isn't your concern, Mr. Thornton. She's my employee. That makes it my concern. An employment contract doesn't supersede an engagement contract. It does when the engagement was obtained through coercion and maintained through violence." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. You're making accusations you can't prove." "Am I?" Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter from the physician who treated Grace's injuries after your last disagreement. Dr. Henry Clark. He documented everything. Bruises on her arms, her ribs, her throat. He was too afraid to report it while her father was alive, but he's willing to testify now." Grace's breath caught. She hadn't known about any letter. Hadn't known Dr. Clark had documented anything. Victor's face went pale beneath his tan. "Where did you get that?" "Doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is where it'll end up if you don't turn around and ride out of here." "You're bluffing." "Try me." The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Grace watched Victor's face, watched him calculate odds and outcomes the way he calculated everything. Finally, he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Very well, Mr. Thornton. You've won this round. He stepped closer to Ethan, close enough that their faces were inches apart. But let me be clear. That woman is mine. She was promised to me, and I always collect what I'm owed. This isn't over. It won't be over until I have what belongs to me. She doesn't belong to you, see, Ethan said. She doesn't belong to anyone. We'll see. Victor turned and mounted his horse. Enjoy your little victory while it lasts. I'll be back, and next time I won't be so polite. He rode away without looking back, the deputy trailing behind him. Grace's legs gave out. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and steady around her. She buried her face in his chest and let the tears come. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. It's okay, Ethan murmured into her hair. It's okay, he's gone. He'll come back, Grace managed between sobs. You hurt him. Let him. Ethan pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. I meant what I said, Grace. I'm not letting him take you. Not today, not ever. The letter, she said. How did you... Danny, Ethan's mouth quirked. Turns out my little brother is better at investigation than I gave him credit for. He's been sending telegrams all week, tracking down anyone who might have information about Ashworth's past. And Dr. Clark just sent a letter. Dr. Clark hated what Victor did to you. He hated himself for staying silent. When Danny contacted him, he jumped at the chance to help. Grace laughed a wet, broken sound. I had no idea. You were too busy running to look back, Ethan said gently. But you've got people in your corner, Grace. More than you know. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But she had seen Victor's face when he made his threat. She knew that look. It was the same look he'd worn the night she ran. The look that said he would rather destroy something than let it go. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night, Ethan showed her the ring. They were sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the velvet sky. The tension of the day's confrontation still hummed in the air, but there was something else too, a fragile sense of hope that hadn't existed before. Danny gave this back to me, Ethan said, pulling the small gold band from his pocket. After you arrived, he said I'd need it eventually. Grace stared at the ring, catching the lamplight from the window. Your mother's ring. My grandmother's actually. My grandfather gave it to her when they were married back in Pennsylvania. She passed it down to my mother and my mother. He swallowed hard. My mother was wearing it the day she died. Ethan, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. He turned the ring over in his fingers. After my parents died, I swore I'd never give this ring to anyone who didn't deserve it, who didn't see me for who I really am. And I've been waiting 15 years. He looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight. I think I was waiting for you. Ethan, I'm not proposing. Not yet. It's too soon and you've got enough to deal with without me adding pressure. He pressed the ring into her palm. But I want you to hold on to this, as a promise. When this is over, when Victor is gone and you're safe, I'm going to ask you to marry me. And this ring will be part of that question. Grace's hand closed around the gold band. It was warm from his touch, small and perfect, weighted with more meaning than she could comprehend. What if I say no? Then you say no, and I'll respect that. But at least I'll have tried. He smiled that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. I'm done being afraid to try. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. I'm not afraid anymore either, not with you. They sat there until the moon rose. Two people who had been broken by life learning how to be whole again. But the peace wouldn't last. At midnight, Danny burst through the door with news that would change everything. The hotel, he gasped out of breath from running. Victor's not there. Hasn't been since this afternoon. Ethan was on his feet instantly. Where did he go? I don't know, but I found something else. Danny held up a telegram. He's been sending messages to someone in Denver, someone connected to the territorial government. What kind of messages? Danny's face was grim. Legal motions, land disputes. He's not just coming but after by your Grace anymore, Ethan. He's coming after the ranch. Grace's blood turned to ice. The telegram changed everything. Ethan read it 3 times, his face growing darker with each pass. Danny stood by the door, still breathing hard, while Grace clutched the ring in her palm like a lifeline. He's claiming my father stole his land, Ethan said finally, his voice flat with disbelief. Says the original survey was fraudulent, that the Thornton Ranch was built on property that rightfully belongs to the Ashworth family. That's insane, Danny exploded. Pa bought this land fair and square. We've got the deeds, the receipts, everything. Victor knows that. Ethan set down the telegram. He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to tie us up in legal proceedings long enough to bleed us dry. Lawyers cost money. Court appearances cost time. If we're fighting to keep the ranch, we can't focus on protecting Grace. Grace felt sick. This is my fault. Don't. Ethan's voice was sharp. Don't you dare blame yourself for his evil. But if I hadn't come here, if you hadn't come here, I'd still be a bitter fool throwing my mother's ring in the dirt. Ethan crossed to her and took her hands. Victor Ashworth is doing this because he's a monster. That's not your fault. That's his nature. What do we do? Danny asked. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but Grace could see the fury burning beneath. We find proof. Real proof. Victor's not as clean as he pretends to be. Nobody with that much money and that few scruples gets through life without leaving a trail. He looked at his brother. You've been digging into his past. Keep digging. There has to be something. And in the meantime, Ethan said grimly, we prepare for war. The next 3 days were chaos. Ethan hired a lawyer from Denver, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morrison, who arrived on the afternoon stage with a trunk full of legal documents and a reputation for never losing a case. Victor Ashworth, she said, reviewing the papers Ethan had gathered. I know that name. His father made a fortune in textile manufacturing. Legal mostly, but there were always rumors. What kind of rumors? Grace asked. The kind that involved workers dying in unsafe conditions and families being paid to keep quiet. Catherine looked up. The son is supposedly worse. Smarter about hiding it, but worse. Can you prove any of that? Not yet. But I have contacts in Boston who owe me favors. If there's dirt on Victor Ashworth, I'll find it. Meanwhile, Danny disappeared for 2 days on what he called research. He returned dusty and exhausted, but with a gleam in his eye that made Grace nervous. I found something, he announced, bursting into the kitchen where Ethan and Grace were having breakfast. Something big. What? Ethan set down his coffee. Victor Ashworth isn't Victor Ashworth. The silence that followed was deafening. Explain, Ethan said slowly. Danny dropped into a chair, grinning like a man who'd just struck gold. I tracked down a clerk who used to work for Victor's father. Old man retired to a cabin outside Hallbrook. He told me that Victor's real name is Vincent Caldwell, son of a factory foreman who died in a fire at the Ashworth textile mill. Grace's heart stopped. What? Vincent Caldwell, Danny repeated. The original Victor Ashworth died of scarlet fever when he was 8 years old. Vincent's mother worked as a maid in the Ashworth household. When the real Victor died, old man Ashworth was so grief-stricken that he adopted Vincent and gave him his dead son's name. That doesn't make sense, Grace said. Why would he do that? Because Vincent was already living in the house. Had been for years. Danny's grin faded. The clerk thinks old man Ashworth was Vincent's real father. An affair with the maid that produced a son he couldn't publicly acknowledge. When his legitimate heir died, he saw an opportunity. Ethan leaned back in his chair. So Victor Ashworth is actually an illegitimate child who inherited a fortune through deception. It gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Danny pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. The real Victor Ashworth had a sister, Elizabeth. She married and had children before she died 10 years ago. Those children would be the legitimate heirs to the Ashworth fortune if anyone could prove that their mother's brother died without a legal heir. And Vincent knows this, Ethan said. He has to. It's the only explanation for why he's so desperate to maintain control. Danny looked at Grace. Your father's research, the connections he made, the reputation he built. Victor needs all of that to solidify his position. Without it, without you, he's vulnerable. Grace's mind raced. She thought about Victor's obsessive need for control, his fury when she tried to leave, his willingness to chase her across a continent. It had never been about love. It had barely even been about money. It had been about fear. He's afraid, she said slowly, afraid that someone will discover the truth. And that fear makes him dangerous, Ethan said grimly. A cornered animal is the most deadly kind. Catherine Morrison was ecstatic when she heard the news. This is exactly what we needed, she said, pacing Ethan's study with barely contained energy. If we can prove that Victor Ashworth is actually Vincent Caldwell, his entire legal standing collapses. The land claim, the engagement contract, everything becomes fraudulent. How do we prove it? Ethan asked. We need documentation. Birth records, death records, anything that connects Vincent Caldwell to the Ashworth household. Catherine stopped pacing. The clerk Danny found would be a start, but his testimony alone won't be enough. We need paper. Paper that proves the real Victor Ashworth, and that Vincent Caldwell took his place. Where would that paper be? Boston, in the Ashworth family records or the city archives. Catherine frowned, but accessing those records will be difficult. Victor has powerful friends. If he suspects what we're looking for, he'll have everything sealed or destroyed. Then we don't let him suspect, Grace said. Everyone turned to look at her. Victor thinks he's won, she continued. He thinks we're scrambling to defend against his land claim. He doesn't know we've discovered his secret. She took a deep breath. What if I go to him? Pretend I've changed my mind. While he's distracted with me, someone else can get to Boston and find the proof. Absolutely not. Ethan's voice was hard, his eyes blazing. You're not going anywhere near that man. Ethan, listen to me. I said no. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I've spent 3 weeks watching you heal, watching the fear slowly leave your eyes, watching you learn to trust again. I'm not sending you back to the man who broke you. I won't do it. There might not be another way. Then we'll make one. The argument was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats outside. Lots of hoofbeats. Danny moved to the window and went pale. Ethan, you need to see this. They crowded around the window. Outside, a group of men on horseback had gathered in the yard. At their head sat Victor Ashworth, flanked by a man in a federal marshal's uniform. Ethan Thornton, the marshal called out. I have a warrant for the arrest of Grace Whitmore on charges of theft and fraud. Surrender her immediately. Grace's knees buckled. Ethan caught her arm, steadying her. What theft? He demanded through the window. What fraud? She stole valuable research materials from the Ashworth estate, research funded by Mr. Ashworth and legally his property. The marshal held up a document. I have a sworn affidavit and a court order. This isn't a request, Mr. Thornton. It's a legal mandate. My father's research, Grace whispered. The notes I took when I fled. Victor must have reported them as stolen. Did you take them? Ethan's voice was quiet. They were my father's work, his life's work. Victor had no right. She stopped, seeing the look on Ethan's face. Yes, I took them, but they're not his property. They were never his property. Ethan's jaw tightened. He turned back to the window. I need to see that warrant. Come out and I'll show you. Your men stay where they are. I'm not walking into an ambush. Send the marshal alone with the document. A tense pause. Then Victor nodded and the marshal dismounted. Ethan met him at the door. The warrant was real. The charges were detailed. The court order was signed by a judge Grace recognized, a man Victor had bragged about controlling years ago. This is a setup, Ethan said quietly to the marshal. You have to know that. What I know is that I have a job to do. The marshal looked uncomfortable but determined. The lady can fight the charges in court. That's her right. But I have to take her into custody. And if I refuse to let her go, then I arrest you for obstruction and my men take her anyway. The marshal's voice softened. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Mr. Thornton. She'll get a fair trial. With Victor Ashworth's judge, that's not a trial, that's a lynching. Grace touched Ethan's arm. It's okay. It's not okay. It has to be. She stepped past him, facing the marshal with her chin high. I'll go with you peacefully. Grace, no. If you fight them, they'll arrest you too. Then who will find the proof? Who will clear my name? She forced a smile. Trust me, like I trusted you in the barn with the snake. Remember? His face crumpled. For one agonizing moment, she saw beneath the walls, saw the terrified boy who had lost his parents, the wounded man who had been betrayed by everyone he let close. She saw how much it cost him to let her go. I'll find you, he said hoarsely. Whatever it takes, I'll find you and I'll bring you home. I know you will. Victor was smiling as the marshal led her toward the horses, that cold, satisfied smile that haunted her nightmares. Hello again, Grace, he said softly. I told you I always collect what I'm owed. She didn't respond, didn't give him the satisfaction. But as she mounted the horse they provided, she looked back at Ethan standing on the porch of his ranch, his hands clenched at his sides, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. And she made a decision. She would not let Victor Ashworth destroy the man she loved. Whatever it took, whatever she had to sacrifice, she would end this, even if it meant ending herself. The jail in Silver Ridge was small and clean, which was more than Grace had expected. The marshal, whose name she learned was Thomas Webb, seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. I don't like this any more than you do, miss, he said as he locked her cell. But the law is the law. The law can be bought, Grace replied. Victor Ashworth proved that. Marshal Webb didn't argue. He just looked tired. That night, alone in her cell, Grace allowed herself to cry. Not for herself. She'd made her peace with whatever was coming. But for Ethan. For the hope she'd glimpsed in his eyes. The future they might have had. She cried for the ring still hidden in her pocket, warm against her thigh. The ring she couldn't bear to part with even now. She was still awake at midnight when she heard footsteps. Grace. Her head snapped up. Danny stood on the other side of the bars, dressed in dark clothes, a ring of keys in his hand. What are you doing here? Getting you out. He fumbled with the lock. Ethan's plan. He's waiting outside town with horses. Danny, if you do this, you'll both be fugitives. We'll be fugitives together. The lock clicked open. Come on, we don't have much time. They slipped out the back of the Gerald house into the dark streets of Silver Ridge. Grace's heart pounded so loud she was sure someone would hear it. Where's Ethan? She whispered. Miller's Crossing. Same place you first met. Danny's hand closed around her wrist. Stay close. Stay quiet. They made it 2 blocks before Victor stepped out of the shadows. I wondered if you'd try something like this, he said conversationally. He wasn't alone. 4 men flanked him, all armed. The marshal was very accommodating when I suggested additional security might be needed. Danny pushed Grace behind him. Let her go, Ashworth. That's not my name. Victor's smile was razor sharp. But I suppose you knew that already. Your brother's been busy. We know everything, Danny said. Your real identity, your father's deception, the legitimate heirs you've been hiding from. It's over. Is it? Victor moved closer. Tell me, Mr. Thornton, did you find any proof, any documentation, any evidence that would hold up in court? Danny hesitated. I thought not. Victor gestured to his men. Take her. Kill him. No, Grace screamed. Everything happened at once. Danny drew his gun. Victor's men drew theirs. Shots exploded in the darkness, muzzle flashes lighting up the night like lightning. Danny fell. Grace dropped to her knees beside him. Blood spread across his shirt, dark and terrible. His eyes were wide with shock. Danny, look at me. Grace, his voice was weak. Run. You have to run. I'm not leaving you. Tell Ethan. He coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. Tell him I'm sorry. For everything. Tell him yourself. You're going to be fine. You're going to... His hand went limp in hers. No. The word tore out of her like a scream. No, no, no. Victor's men grabbed her arms, dragging her away from Danny's body. She fought like a wild thing, scratching, biting, kicking. It didn't matter. There were too many of them. Such drama, Victor said, watching her struggle. Your father was the same way. Passionate to the end. The words cut through her grief like a blade. What did you say? Did you really think your father died of natural causes? Victor leaned close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the madness dancing in his eyes. He was going to cut me out of the research, going to take everything I'd invested and give it to some university. I couldn't allow that. You killed him. I expedited his passing. Heart attacks are so common in men his age. Victor shrugged. Just like tragic accidents happen to people who ask too many questions. Your new friends, for instance. Horror washed through her. You're going to kill Ethan. I'm going to take everything he has. His ranch, his reputation, his brother's life. Victor's smile widened. And then I'm going to make you watch while I destroy everything he ever cared about. That's the price for humiliating me, Grace. That's what happens when you run. She stopped struggling, stopped fighting, let her body go limp in the grip of Victor's men. You're right, she said quietly. Victor's eyebrows rose. I beg your pardon. You're right, I can't beat you, I can't escape you, I can't protect anyone from you. She lifted her eyes to his. But I can tell you where the proof is, the documentation that exposes who you really are. I can give you that, and you can destroy it, and this can all be over. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired of running. I'm tired of watching people die for me. Her voice cracked. I just want it to stop. Please, just make it stop. Victor studied her for a long moment. She could see him calculating, weighing the risks and rewards. Where? He finally asked. Not here, I'll show you. But you have to promise. You have to swear that you'll leave Ethan alone. That once you have what you want, you'll go back to Boston and never touch him or his ranch. You're in no position to bargain. Then kill me. Kill me right here and never find out where those documents are. Because I'm the only one who knows Victor. I'm the only one who can save you. The lie came easily. She had no idea where the proof was, didn't even know if it existed. But she saw the flicker of doubt in Victor's eyes, the fear that had driven him for so long. He believed her. Very well, he said, show me. She led them into the darkness away from Danny's body, away from any hope of rescue. But as they walked, she slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the cool metal of Ethan's mother's ring. She had a plan. It was a terrible plan, and it would probably get her killed. But it was all she had. They stopped at an old mine shaft outside of town, abandoned for years, and supposedly haunted by the ghosts of miners who died in a collapse. Grace had heard about this place from one of the ranch hands. A death trap waiting to claim more lives. Perfect. It's in there, Grace said, pointing to the entrance. A gaping mouth of darkness that seemed to swallow the moonlight. My father hid copies of his research in a safety box. He was paranoid about his work being stolen. He told me about this place before he died. Victor's eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe he hid important documents in an abandoned mine. I expect you to believe he was dying and afraid and desperate to protect his life's work from the man who was killing him. Grace's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. You want the proof, it's inside. Go get it yourself. I'm not a fool, you first. Fine. She walked into the darkness with a little hesitation. Victor followed, a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. His men stayed at the entrance, guarding against anyone who might follow. The tunnel stretched deep into the earth, the air growing cooler and mustier with each step. Ancient support beams lined the walls, wooden and rotting, barely holding back tons of rock. Grace counted her paces, waiting for the right moment. How much farther? Victor demanded. Not far. This better not be a trick, Grace. It's not a trick. I'm giving you exactly what you want. She stopped at a junction where two tunnels branched off in different directions. The support beams here were particularly old, the wood dry as kindling. Here, she said. He hid it behind that beam. Victor moved past her, holding up his lantern to examine the beam she'd indicated. His back was to her. His attention was elsewhere. Now. Grace grabbed the lantern and threw it at the support beam with all her strength. The glass shattered. The oil spread. The old dry wood caught fire instantly. Victor spun around, his face twisted with rage. What have you done? What my father couldn't. Grace backed toward the tunnel entrance. I'm ending this. The fire spread faster than she'd expected, racing up the support beam and igniting the ancient timbers around it. The tunnel groaned, a deep, ominous sound that vibrated through the earth. Victor lunged for her. She dodged, scrambling over rocks and debris. His hand caught her dress, tearing the fabric, but she wrenched free and kept running. Behind her, the ceiling began to collapse. She ran blindly through the darkness, stumbling and falling and picking herself up again. The roar of falling rock filled her ears, drowning out everything else. Victor's screams, her own heartbeat, the desperate prayer she was whispering over and over. She saw light ahead, the entrance, safety. 10 feet, 5 feet, 2 feet. She burst out of the tunnel, but just as the entire structure collapsed behind her. The noise was deafening, a thunderous avalanche of stone and earth that seemed to shake the whole world. Dust billowed out of the entrance, choking her, blinding her. Victor's men stood frozen, staring at the destruction. Then one of them raised his gun. "You killed him! You killed him, you!" The shot never came. Instead, there was the sound of hoofbeats, dozens of them. And then Ethan was there, riding at the head of what looked like half the men in Silver Ridge. Will Carter was with him, Ruth Bennett, a dozen others Grace didn't recognize, but who all carried weapons and looked ready to use them. "Put down your guns," Ethan ordered. "Now." Victor's men hesitated, then slowly they complied. Ethan was off his horse and at Grace's side in seconds. His hands ran over her, checking for injuries while his eyes searched her face. "You're alive." His voice was raw with emotion. "Thank God you're alive." "Danny," Grace managed. "Victor shot him. I couldn't. I tried to stop the bleeding, but..." Ethan's face went gray. "We're behind the jailhouse. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He pressed his forehead to hers just for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with grief and relief and something that sounded almost like wonder. "You collapsed a mine on Victor Ashworth. I had to stop him. He killed my father. He was going to kill you." Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "God help me, I love you." "I love you too." She pulled back to look at him. "But Danny, we have to go to Danny. He's alive." Grace's heart stopped. "What?" "Ruth found him. The bullet missed anything vital. He's at Doc Morrison's right now, cursing a blue streak and demanding whiskey." Ethan's eyes glistened. "He's going to be okay, Grace. He's going to be okay." She collapsed against him, too overwhelmed to speak. Around them, the townspeople secured Victor's men and began the grim work of excavating the mine entrance. If Victor had survived, which seemed impossible, they would find him. If he hadn't, they would at least find his body. But Grace didn't care about that anymore. She was safe. Ethan was safe. Danny was alive. It was over. It was finally over. 3 days passed before they found Victor's body. The miners who volunteered for the excavation worked around the clock, pulling away rubble piece by piece. When they finally reached him, he was buried under 1,000 pounds of rock, his hands still clutching his pistol, his face frozen in an expression of disbelief. Grace didn't go to see him. She didn't need to. The nightmare was over. But the healing was just beginning. Danny spent a week at Dr. Morrison's clinic complaining about the food and flirting with the nurse until she threatened to sedate him permanently. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing bone and artery by less than an inch. "Luckiest fool in Colorado," the doctor declared. "Another half-inch and we'd be planning a funeral instead of removing stitches." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Danny said with his trademark grin. "I'm just too pretty to die." Ethan sat by his brother's bedside every day. Their usual bickering was replaced by something quieter, something that looked a lot like gratitude. "You almost died for her," Ethan said one afternoon when Grace was down the hall fetching water. "I almost died for you," Danny corrected. "You were ready to tear the world apart to save her. I just helped speed things along." "That's not..." Danny reached out and gripped his brother's hand. "I've watched you lock yourself away for 15 years. I've watched you refuse every chance at happiness because you were too scared to risk getting hurt. And then this woman shows up covered in dust and blood and stubborn as a mule, and suddenly you're alive again." He smiled. "That's worth a bullet. Hell, that's worth 10 bullets." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I never said thank you for the ring, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. You're my brother. That's what brothers do." "I know, but still, thank you." Danny's grin softened into something real. "You're welcome. Now go propose to that woman before she comes to her senses and realizes she can do better." Catherine Morrison arrived from Denver with news that changed everything. She burst into Ruth's boarding house where Ethan and Grace were having dinner, her face flushed with triumph. "I found it," she announced. "The proof, everything." She spread a stack of documents across the table. Birth certificates, death records, letters, financial statements. A paper trail that stretched back 40 years and exposed every lie Victor Ashworth, Vincent Caldwell, had ever told. "The real Victor Ashworth died of scarlet fever at age 8, Catherine explained. His death certificate was filed in Boston, but mysteriously disappeared from the archives 10 years ago. I found a copy in a church record that the Ashworth family apparently didn't know existed. And Vincent Caldwell? Ethan asked. Born to Thomas Caldwell, a factory worker, and Eleanor Caldwell, a maid. Except Eleanor's maiden name was Ashworth. She was old man Ashworth's cousin, which means Vincent was legitimate Ashworth blood, just not through the proper channels. Catherine smiled grimly. When the real Victor died, the old man saw an opportunity to salvage his legacy. He adopted Vincent, changed his name, and raised him as his own son. The only people who knew the truth were the family servants, and most of them were paid off or threatened into silence. What about the legitimate heirs? Grace asked. The real Victor's sister's children. That's where it gets interesting. Catherine pulled out another document. Victor's sister, Elizabeth, married a man named Robert Whitmore. They had 2 children before Elizabeth died. Those children, Ethan and Grace Whitmore, would be the rightful heirs to the Ashworth fortune. Grace's blood ran cold. Oh, and what did you say? Ethan and Grace Whitmore. They're in their 30s now, living in... Catherine frowned. Why, my mother's maiden name was Whitmore, Grace whispered. Grace Whitmore. She died when I was 3. The room went silent. That's not possible, Ethan said slowly. That would mean I'm one of the legitimate heirs. Grace's voice shook. Victor wasn't just trying to control my father's research. He was trying to eliminate a threat to his inheritance. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. He knew, Grace said. He must have known who I really was. That's why he insisted on the engagement. That's why he killed my father. If he married me, he could control the threat. If he eliminated my father, he removed the only person who might have connected the dots. But your father never told you, Ethan said gently. He was protecting me. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. All those years he knew who I was, who my mother really was, and he never said a word because he knew what Victor would do if the truth came out. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her while she processed the impossible revelation. Her entire life had been built on lies. Not malicious ones, but lies nonetheless. Her father had loved her enough to keep her safe at the cost of her heritage. And Victor had loved nothing but power and money enough to destroy anyone who threatened them. What happens now? Ethan asked Catherine over Grace's head. Now, Catherine gathered the documents with careful precision. We take this to the courts. With Victor dead and this evidence in hand, the Ashworth estate reverts to its rightful heirs. She paused. Which means Grace inherits a fortune. Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes. I don't want it. What? I don't want his money. I don't want anything that came from that family. Her voice was fierce despite the tears. My father spent his whole life trying to escape that legacy. He built something real, something good with his own hands. I'm not going to dishonor that by claiming blood money. Grace, you could. I could what? Buy a mansion, hire servants, become exactly the kind of person Victor wanted me to be. She shook her head. No, give it to charity. Give it to the workers who suffered in those factories. Give it to anyone who needs it more than I do. But I don't want a single penny. Catherine looked at her with something like admiration. You're certain. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Ethan's arms tightened around her. That's my girl. The legal proceedings took 2 months. Catherine Morrison navigated the courts with surgical precision, presenting evidence that demolished every claim Victor had ever made. The land dispute against Ethan's ranch was thrown out. The theft charges against Grace were dropped. The engagement contract was declared void due to fraud and coercion. And the Ashworth fortune, all $30 million of it, was placed in a charitable trust administered by a board that Grace personally selected. The money would fund hospitals, schools, and worker protection programs across the country. You're giving away a kingdom, Danny observed one afternoon as Grace signed the final documents. I'm building something better, she replied. Something that can't be used to hurt people. Pa would be proud, Ethan said quietly. He always said the measure of a person wasn't what they took, but what they gave. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He had his moments. The ranch flourished that summer. With the legal troubles behind them, Ethan threw himself into the work with renewed energy. The horses bred strong and healthy. The cattle grew fat on the summer grass. Will Carter, now promoted to assistant foreman, worked with a loyalty born of respect rather than obligation, and Grace worked alongside them. She tended the sick animals and trained the skittish ones, and slowly, day by day, transformed the ranch's modest veterinary operation into something remarkable. Word spread through the territory about the woman doctor who could heal horses that other vets had given up on. Ranchers came from 3 counties to seek her expertise. "You're going to put Doc Morrison out of business," Danny teased her one evening. "Doc Morrison only treats humans. I only treat animals. We're not competing. Yet, give it time. The animals like you better than he likes people anyway." Ethan watched these exchanges with quiet contentment. The ranch house that had been so empty for so long now rang with laughter and arguments and the particular chaos that came from people who genuinely cared about each other. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He'd forgotten a lot of things. How to hope, how to trust, how to let someone see the broken parts of him without fear of judgment. Grace had given all of that back to him. Now it was time to give her something in return. He planned the proposal for weeks. Danny helped, which meant there was a lot of teasing and a lot of terrible suggestions. "What if you spelled out 'marry me' with the cattle?" "No, too dramatic." "But also genuine." Danny grinned. "Keep it simple. Grace isn't a woman who needs grand gestures. She needs to know you mean it." "I mean it more than I've ever meant anything." "Then show her that. The rest is just decoration." Ethan chose a Sunday evening in late August when the summer heat had finally begun to ease and the first hints of autumn colored the edges of the world. He led Grace to the spot where they'd first kissed the porch of the ranch house with the sun setting over the mountains in the distance. "Ethan, what is this about?" Grace asked as he positioned her facing the view. "You've been acting strange all day." "Have I?" "You burned breakfast. You put your shirt on inside out. You called Will by Danny's name 3 times. Maybe I've just been distracted." "By what?" "By this." He dropped to one knee. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Grace Whitmore." Ethan began, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I spent 15 years believing I would never find someone who saw me for who I really am. I built walls so high I couldn't see over them. And I told myself that was protection, when really it was just fear." He pulled out the ring, his mother's ring, polished and gleaming in the fading light. "Then you showed up with blood on your sleeve and fire in your eyes, and you demolished every wall I'd ever built. You challenged me. You frustrated me. You made me want to be a better man than I ever thought I could be." His voice cracked. "You gave me back my hope, Grace. You gave me back my faith in the possibility of something good." Tears streamed down Grace's face, but she didn't look away. She held his gaze with those honey-colored eyes that had captured him from the first moment he saw them. "I don't have a fortune to offer you," Ethan continued. "I can't give you mansions or servants or the kind of life you were born to have. All I have is this ranch, these horses, and a heart that's been yours since the day we met." He held up the ring. "My mother wore this ring for 22 years. My grandmother wore it for 40 before her. It's not worth much in dollars, but it's worth everything to me. And I can't imagine giving it to anyone but you." He took a breath. "Grace Whitmore, will you marry me?" The silence stretched for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then Grace was on her knees beside him, her hands cupping his face, her lips pressed against his in a kiss that said everything words couldn't express. "Yes," she breathed when they finally broke apart. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Maybe it had been. Maybe his mother had known somehow that one day a woman with honey-colored eyes would come along and bring her son back to life. "I love you," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too." Grace laughed through her tears. "Now stand up before you ruin your good trousers." He stood, pulling her up with him, and they stood together on the porch where their story had truly begun. In the distance, Danny let out a whoop that startled half the horses in the barn. "'Bout damn time," he shouted from somewhere behind them. Grace laughed and buried her face in Ethan's chest. "How long has he been watching?" "Probably the whole time. He's not known for subtlety. I noticed." They stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars emerged in the velvet sky. Two people who had been broken by life finding wholeness in each other. The wedding took place on the first Saturday of September. It was nothing like the grand affair Victor had planned. There were no silk flowers imported from Paris, no orchestra from New York, no guest list of politicians and society matrons. Instead, there was the little church in Silver Ridge, filled with ranch hands and townspeople, and anyone who wanted to witness the impossible. Ethan Thornton, the stone-hearted bachelor, finally taking a bride. Reverend Thomas Sterling presided over the ceremony. He was 60 years old, white-haired and kind-eyed, and he had known Ethan since the day he was born. "I've been waiting for this moment for 15 years, he told Ethan before the ceremony. "Your mother asked me to pray for you, before she died. She asked me to pray that you'd find someone who could see past your walls. Did you, Mother?" "Every Sunday without fail." The Reverend smiled. Seems like God was listening after all. Grace walked down the aisle on Danny's arm since she had no father to give her away. She wore a simple white dress that Ruth Bennett had altered from her own wedding gown, and she carried wildflowers that the ranch hands had gathered from the meadow that morning. She had never looked more beautiful. Ethan felt his throat tighten as she approached. This woman, this fierce, brilliant, stubborn woman had chosen him. Out of all the possibilities in the world, she had chosen to spend her life with a broken rancher who had forgotten how to love. He would spend the rest of his days making sure she never regretted that choice. The vows they exchanged were traditional, spoken in the small church with the summer sun streaming through the windows. But when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed his bride for the first time as her husband, the cheers that erupted from the congregation were anything but traditional. Will Carter was crying openly. Ruth Bennett was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Even Catherine Morrison, who had traveled all the way from Denver for the occasion, looked suspiciously misty, and Danny was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split in two. "Took you long enough," he said when Ethan and Grace made their way back down the aisle. "Some things are worth waiting for," Ethan replied. "Yeah," Danny's voice softened. "Yeah, they are." The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the fence posts. There was food and music and dancing that lasted until well past midnight. Ethan and Grace danced their first dance to a fiddle tune that one of the ranch hands played swaying together under the stars. "Mrs. Thornton," Ethan murmured against her hair. "Mr. Thornton," she replied. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We have time." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with joy. "We have all the time in the world." And they did. The years that followed were everything Ethan had never dared to hope for. Their first child came the following summer, a daughter with her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. They named her Eleanor after Grace's grandmother, and she was spoiled rotten by everyone on the ranch from the moment she drew her first breath. "She's going to be trouble," Danny predicted, watching the infant wrap her tiny fingers around his thumb. "She's going to be magnificent," Grace corrected. Two more children followed. A son named Thomas after Grace's father, who inherited Ethan's love of horses and could ride before he could properly walk. And another daughter, Catherine, named after the lawyer who had helped them win their freedom, who had her mother's quick mind and her father's quiet intensity. The ranch continued to grow. Ethan expanded the horse breeding operation, focusing on quality over quantity, and soon Thornton horses were sought after across the entire Western Territory. Grace established a proper veterinary practice, training young people who came from as far as California to learn from her. And every evening when the work was done and the children were sleeping, Ethan and Grace sat on the porch together and watched the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked one night many years later. Grace looked at him, her face softened by age, but no less beautiful. "Regret what?" "Giving away the fortune. You could have had everything, Grace. Mansions, servants, a life of ease." "I do have everything." She reached over and took his hand. "I have you. I have our children. I have a home filled with love and purpose and meaning." She smiled. "What could $30 million give me that I don't already have? A house that doesn't need a new roof every 5 years." She laughed, that full, rich laugh that still made his heart skip after all this time. "The roof gives you something to complain about. You'd be bored without it." "I would never be bored with you." Flatterer. Truth-teller. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence watching the last light fade from the sky. Danny had married too eventually, a school teacher from Denver who could match his wit word for word. They had 4 children of their own and lived in a house just over the hill, close enough for Sunday dinners and far enough for privacy. "Never thought I'd see the day," Ethan said when Danny announced his engagement. "The eternal bachelor settling down." "Had to keep up with my big brother," Danny replied. "Can't let you have all the happiness." Ruth Bennett lived to be 93 years old, and when she passed, half the town turned out for her funeral. She had been a mother figure to more people than anyone could count. Her boarding house became a memorial in her honor, a place where women fleeing dangerous situations could find safety and support. Grace funded it from the profits of her veterinary practice. It was called Bennett House, and over the years it helped hundreds of women start new lives. Ruth would be proud, Ethan told her after the dedication ceremony. Ruth would say, "I'm being too sentimental and that there's work to be done," Grace replied. "That too." The children grew up strong and kind and brave. Eleanor married a lawyer from Boston and spent her life fighting for workers' rights, carrying on the legacy of the charitable trust her mother had established. Thomas took over the horse breeding operation when Ethan finally admitted he was getting too old to manage it alone. Catherine became a doctor, a real doctor with credentials and everything, and opened a clinic in Silver Ridge that served anyone who needed care, regardless of their ability to pay. "They're all so much better than we were at their age," Ethan observed one day watching his grandchildren play in the yard. "They had better examples," Grace said. "They had you. I was just the grumpy rancher who came with the property. You were never grumpy, stubborn maybe, closed off definitely, but never grumpy." That's a generous interpretation. "I'm a generous person." He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Yes, you are. You always were." On the 50th anniversary of their wedding, the entire family gathered at the ranch. There were so many people now. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends and neighbors, and people who had become family through years of shared work and shared joy. Tables stretched across the yard laden with food that had been prepared for days. Music filled the air. Children ran laughing through the grass while their parents called after them to slow down. "Be careful. Watch where you're going." Ethan stood on the porch watching it all and felt his eyes burn with tears. He didn't try to hide them. Grace came to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of 50 years of practice. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The day I threw my mother's ring in the dirt," he said quietly. "I was so certain I would never find anyone who loved me for myself. So certain that I was destined to be alone." He looked at the chaos of people in his yard, at the children who bore his name and his blood, at the woman who had walked into his life with nothing but a trunk and a stubborn refusal to give up. "Now I know that the best things in life are the ones we never see coming." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You saved me, Grace, not just from loneliness or fear, but from myself. You showed me that it was possible to be seen and loved and accepted, walls and all. You gave me a family when I'd given up on ever having one." "You saved me too," she said softly. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You stood between me and every danger without ever asking for anything in return. You loved me when I didn't know how to let myself be loved. Seems like we saved each other. Seems like we did." He kissed her, then slow and sweet, and somewhere behind them, their youngest great-grandchild squealed with delighted disgust. "Gross. Great-grandma and great-grandpa are being mushy again." "Get used to it, kid," Danny's voice called out. "They've been like that for 50 years, ain't going to stop now." Laughter rippled through the gathering. Ethan smiled against Grace's lips. "I love you. I love you too." And that was the truth of it. After everything, the pain and the fear and the years of running, the enemies and the friends and the battles won and lost, love was what remained. Love was what had saved them. Love was what had built this family from 2 broken people who had found in each other the missing pieces they'd stopped searching for. That evening, as the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Ethan and Grace sat on the porch one last time. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose and purple. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, filled with the evidence of a life well lived. "No regrets?" Grace asked. "Not a single one." "Me neither." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. 50 years ago, he had been a man with a heart of stone and a future of nothing but emptiness. Then she had arrived. A woman with blood on her sleeve and fire in her eyes, carrying nothing but a trunk and a determination to survive. She had brought him back to life. She had given him everything. And now, sitting on this porch in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the family they had built together, Ethan Thornton finally understood what his mother had known all those years ago. Some things are worth waiting for. Some people are worth fighting for. And love, real love, the kind that sees past walls and heals old wounds and builds something beautiful from broken pieces, love is always worth the risk. He had refused every woman in the country. He had waited without knowing he was waiting. And she had arrived exactly when she was meant to, carrying nothing but a trunk and a heart brave enough to love a man who had forgotten how to let himself be loved. This was their story, not a story of grand gestures and sweeping romance, but of patience and healing. And two broken people who found in each other the missing pieces they had stopped searching for. It was in the end a love story. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names. Grace's breathing had grown soft and steady, her head still resting against Ethan's shoulder. The ranch settled into evening quiet, broken only by the occasional nicker of a horse or the distant call of a coyote. Ethan closed his eyes and let the peace wash over him. 50 years, half a century of mornings waking up beside the woman he loved, of watching the sun rise over the land they'd protected together, of building something that would outlast them both. In the house behind them, he could hear Eleanor directing the cleanup. His daughter had inherited her mother's organizational skills and her father's stubborn determination to see things done right. Through the window, he watched his grandchildren, helping their laughter floating out into the gathering dusk. Grandpa, Ethan opened his eyes. Thomas stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his military uniform perfectly pressed. The boy looked so much like Ethan had at that age. Same gray eyes, same set to the jaw. But there was something different too, something softer. Thomas had been raised with love, not loss, with encouragement, not survival. Thought you'd be asleep by now, Ethan said. Long day tomorrow. Too much on my mind to sleep. Thomas climbed the steps and sat on the railing. Thank you for the story, sir, about you and Grandma. Your grandmother, Grace murmured without opening her eyes, is still awake and can hear every word. Thomas grinned. Sorry, Grandma. No, you're not. But there was warmth in her upper. I've been thinking, Thomas said, his smile fading, about what you said, about why men fight, why we build, why we don't give up. Ethan waited. The boy would get there in his own time. I'm scared, Thomas admitted, about tomorrow, about France, about everything that comes after. Fear's not a weakness, son. It's a warning system. Keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. Ethan leaned forward. The question isn't whether you're scared. The question is what you do with that fear. What did you do with it when Victor came for Grandma? Ethan thought about that summer, about Victor Ashworth standing in his yard making threats, about Grace arrested Danny shot everything falling apart, about the moment he'd realized that fear could either paralyze him or propel him forward. I decided, Ethan said slowly, that what I was afraid of losing mattered more than what I was afraid of facing. Your grandmother was worth fighting for. This ranch was worth protecting. Our future together was worth risking everything. He looked at the young man who would leave tomorrow for uncertain shores. You're going to face things in France that will test you, things that might make you question everything. But remember this, you come from people who didn't give up, who fought for what mattered, who built something lasting from the ashes of loss. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I won't let you down, sir. You couldn't if you tried. Ethan's voice was gruff. You're a Thornton. Thorntons don't know how to quit. Thomas stood, straightened his uniform. I should let you both rest. Thomas, Grace said, opening her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Take this with you. Thomas unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph. Ethan and Grace on their wedding day, young and fierce and impossibly hopeful. When things get hard, Grace said, when you're tired and scared and wondering why you're there, look at this. Remember that you come from love. That love is what built this family. And love is what will see you through. Thomas's eyes were suspiciously bright as he tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket. Thank you, Grandma. He saluted them both crisp and formal, then turned and walked into the house. Grace and Ethan sat in silence for a while longer, watching the stars emerge one by one. Do you think he'll be all right? Grace asked quietly. I think he's stronger than he knows, just like his grandmother. Flatterer. Truth teller. She smiled and nestled closer. I meant what I said earlier, about having everything, about no regrets. I know you did. Ethan Thornton, she said, her voice carrying a hint of laughter. Who would have thought the man who threw his mother's ring in the dirt, the man who swore he'd die alone? Look at you now. Look at us, he corrected. Yes. Her hand found the ring on her finger, worn smooth by 50 years of wearing. Look at us. They sat there on the porch as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them. The ranch was quiet now. Everyone had either gone home or gone to bed. Tomorrow, Thomas would leave. Life would continue its relentless march forward. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. Ethan thought about the boy he'd been, 14 years old, standing over his parents' graves, certain that he would never love anything again, certain that the world was cruel and cold and empty. He thought about the man he'd become, 29 years old, throwing his mother's ring in the dirt, certain he was destined for loneliness. And he thought about the woman who had changed everything, who had walked into his life with blood on her sleeve and fire in her eyes and shown him that broken things could be mended, that walls could be torn down, that love was possible even for those who had forgotten how to hope. Grace, thank you. She lifted her head to look at him. For what? For not giving up on yourself, on me, on us. She smiled, and even in the darkness he could see the love in her eyes. The same love he'd seen on their wedding day. The same love that had carried them through 50 years of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. You made it easy, she said simply. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did. Liar. But he was smiling too. Well, she admitted, maybe not the easiest, but definitely the best. He kissed her then there on the porch where they'd shared their first kiss 50 years ago, where he'd proposed, where they'd built a life together, one sunset at a time. And Ethan Thornton, who had spent 15 years believing he would die alone, who had thrown his mother's ring in the dirt in a moment of despair, who had built walls so high he couldn't see over them, felt nothing but gratitude for the woman in his arms, for the family they'd created, for every moment of woe and every moment of pain that had led them here, for the ring that had found its way home, for love, always, always for love.